Welcome to the Supernatural with Laura Maxwell on Eternal Radio. In these programs, we will hear the true supernatural accounts from those who tried various spiritualities.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
Laura, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to come on your show and share the research to your audience.
It's such a delight to have you on, and I'm really quite impressed with the research you and your colleague have done, so this is just a wonderful opportunity to have you on here. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
It's like an umbrella term, as it were, because I see it as it's not just a case of
I would be glad to, Laura. It's been 20 some years now that I have been down this rabbit hole, I call it, looking for answers and to a phenomenon that I actually really knew nothing about before I picked up my first book. But I want to commend you on your little bit of research you've done on trying to understand what the abduction experience is about and the different types of entities that are reported. You're very accurate on that. And something your listeners might want to know is, looking at the history of this phenomenon, which a lot of people don't really look at history too much of, of anything, even, our own countries or our own political, part of our countries or society in itself. But, we can learn from our histories. It helps us to not repeat it again, so they say. But the beginnings of the UFO and abduction experience and the contactee experience, if you take it back into the 1950s, that the people that claimed to be contactees or had contact with so-called extraterrestrials or aliens at that time described them as being very human-like. Um, Matter of fact, it was just like we do as humans. But these entities claim to be from Mars or Venus or Jupiter or even from the sun itself. But as science started getting into rocketry and we started launching satellites and rockets into space, all of a sudden these entities that they were in contact with in the 50s were no longer from the solar system. Now they're from farther out, into the stars, into different galaxies, and different suns far away. And it's quite interesting that the farther science has been able to reach out into the universe with these telescopes that we have, and and space probes, the farther away these entities say they're from. Uh, and that's interesting that they keep changing their story. And not only that, but like you said, they change their appearances. Some of them are the typical gray, big head, big eyed, almond shaped eyes aliens you see in Hollywood. And that's mostly what's reported with the abduction experience. But there's also the reptilian style, like you talked about, the ones that look like Grey Mantis. And then you have the ones that are so called, you know, more advanced spiritual type beings, and they look like what people term as Nordics. You know, long gowns, long flowing blonde hair, and exquisite features, facial features, and even their builds are like uh, they're in super shape or whatever. So it's very confusing, phenomenon that even though there's a common thread between all of it, there's still some differences between the different types of experiences that people have. But getting to where, but getting to where I, go ahead. Yeah,
It just reminded me of something. I've noticed that too, way back 20 odd years ago when I was into New Age and also studying aliens, I noticed as well that research and history down the years is almost as if the aliens would tell lies down through history. But unless you knew that, unless you knew the history of it, you would be deceived. Similarly with fairies, the whole phenomenon of fairies, if you look at the history
sure.
of fairies right down to, fairies used to be seen as being very evil. And over the decades, it's changed to now where they're seen as almost like spirit guides and helpful entities. So it's interesting that if people don't know the history, and instead they look at, shall I say, pseudo scholarship, which might seem an insult, but there's a lot of folks out there today who really are sincere
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to see all sorts of red flags that'll go up that we have found once we started doing the deep research into the abduction and UFO experience itself. And keep in mind, when you start coming across what I call red flags, that means things that don't jive or don't make sense, or, you know, that shouldn't be that way. Those things, you should never forget those. You should remember them and make a list of them, because the more of those you see, the more you understand that this is not what it seems to be. You know, what we're familiar with being told about the abduction experience, what we have found in this research, it is not what it appears to be. And that's what I want to bring to your listeners in this show, is what they're getting ready to hear by the time we get to the end of this whole story is showing the research itself, what we found. But it's the most powerful evidence in the world today that exposes the entities behind the UFO abduction phenomenon for who they really are. There's no other evidence in the world that proves anything about this experience. It doesn't prove that it's extraterrestrial. It doesn't prove that they're alien. It doesn't prove that they come from a star system somewhere else out in the galaxy or the universe. It doesn't prove that there's life elsewhere in the universe, but it does prove, the research and the findings we have does show that it's something far, far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. But at the same time, at the end of this story, you will also understand that no matter how sinister this appears, or it actually is, there is a hope above all of it. There is a hope that destroys this phenomenon and destroys these entities, and it exposes them for what they are. Now, how did I get into all of this? That goes back 20 some years now. Back in 1992, I was on a vacation trip to visit my brother, who was living up in Alaska. And I was taking my son and my mother with me to go visit for, I was going to be there a week to 10 days, and my mother and my son were going to stay for a month and visit with his cousins and my sister-in-law. And the trip out of Florida, where I was living at the time, I was flying out of Orlando, Florida, going to Anchorage, and that's a 10-hour flight. And I thought, this is a long time on an airplane. And I'll tell you, I've done longer flights flying over here to, Korea. That's a different story. But that 10-hour flight, I thought, this is before iPods. This is before iPhones. It's before iPads, for those of you that are that old. So I decided to pick up a magazine or a book at the airport to take with me and read to pass the time on the airplane. So I looked into the book stand, the newsstand they have there in the airport. I didn't find a magazine that interested me, so I went over to the book section. In the fictional section, I wanted something that would entertain to pass the time. And there was a section with science fiction books in there, and I used to be an avid science fiction reader when I was in high school. So I thought, well, let me go back and look and see if they've got a science fiction book that'll hold me over for this trip. And I picked up one particular book, and it looked like a science fiction book to me. It was about a subject that I really didn't have any interest in at all. I know it was science fiction, but it was an odd topic to me at the time. It wasn't something that I paid much attention to. So I turned the book over and looked at the back of it, where it gives a synopsis of what the story's about, and it puzzled me when I read it, because it was reading as if the book was science fact. It was actually supposedly a story based on science research by a couple fellows of an event that happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 about a crashed flying saucer. The book was titled UFO Crash at Roswell. Now, to me, that sounded science fiction, but here they were saying this was actual research, and they found enough information to say that there was an alien craft that had crashed there in 1947. To me, that made no sense, because as a science fiction reader, I understand that science fiction is fiction. It just has a science tint to it, you know. It's escapism. It's fantasy. It's entertainment, and I knew that to be what it was. But this book was graying that line between reality and fantasy, and I was puzzled by that. So I took the book and I bought it and I read it on the trip. And when I got back, I had to know more about these UFOs, which I at the time knew nothing about. And I happened to come across a couple of people that had just opened, believe it or not, a UFO museum on International Drive in Orlando, Florida, over by Disney World and Universal Studios, and you know where all the entertainment is for tourists. And they had opened up this little museum, and I saw it on TV on a little newscast advertisement for it. So I thought, well, these guys ought to be able to help me out. So I took a weekend, went over one Saturday and to Orlando and found this little museum, just a little storefront, you know, and they had a history of the UFO phenomenon, basically was what it is. A lot of newspaper articles, magazine articles, lots of nice pictures and stuff. It was set up really well to get a basic understanding of the UFO phenomenon. And I got to talking to the owner and his wife of the place, and had a lot of questions for them after I went through their little museum. And my interest is getting bigger and bigger and bigger in this subject. You know, I'm trying to learn what I can about it. But still, to me, it doesn't make sense. There's no real aliens, right? You know, it's sci-fi. And I'm still not understanding how people could actually believe there's really aliens when there aren't any. It's just us in this universe. That's the way I thought at the time, back in 1992. I didn't have a religious background. I was probably what you could call an agnostic humanist. My focus in life was working my job and, helping raise my son. That was my real focus. I had, things that I did with some friends, but otherwise my life was kind of busy. I didn't have time to study these kind of things. But the more I learned about this subject, the more I was gaining information, the more I wanted to know. And that's where I told you I stepped into that rabbit hole, and I've been down in it for 20 some years now, looking at this information. Well, these two people, this couple helped me out a lot. Come to find out, the gentleman that owned the store was a member of the Mutual UFO Network, the largest scientifically based organization for researching and investigating UFOs in the world. There's about 4,000 members worldwide. They're in, mainly in the U.S., but they have memberships in other countries. As a matter of fact, because I'm living over here in South Korea, and also, a field investigator for them, they actually recently appointed me the national director for South Korea. So any reports that come in from people that are reporting them in South Korea, they'll come to me so I can investigate, which I didn't mind helping them out in that manner. I used to be a state section director there in Florida, so I've got the experience to do that. And I've got a couple guys that I'm training up right now as investigators here with me in South Korea. But that's on to another story there for later. We'll come back to that part of it. But as he introduced me to MUFON, he says, this is what the organization is. It's a volunteer organization. And they can, if you're interested in becoming an actual researcher, field investigator, who follows up on sighting reports and investigates them and documents them and gets them into the database so they can try to find an answer to this phenomenon, you're welcome to join them. So I did. And I was trained up by the fellow there in Orlando at the museum to become a field investigator. And I got my status as field investigator. And then he brought it to my attention. He said, there's no real chapter of MUFON over in your county, which is Brevard County, Florida, where I lived, which is where the Space Center is located. There's no organization set up over there. And what MUFON does is try to get people to become state section directors of a county or a number of counties in the states and set up a group in those areas to where they can be available to do, sighting investigations and reports as they come in. And I said, well, I'm interested in that. And I'm thinking, boy, I can actually become involved, not just read about this stuff, and I'm still kind of, wondering if this stuff is even real in the first place. I understand what UFO means, unidentified flying object. People look up in the sky, they see something, a sparkle of light, and it's moving. They can't tell what it is. Guess what? That's a UFO. That doesn't mean it's an alien spaceship, which most of society has made the two terms blur together. Most of the time when people say UFO, they automatically think that it's extraterrestrial. Well, I have to keep that separated because that's wrong. It's wrong thinking. When people say UFOs are real, of course they are. If you see something that's unidentified, then it's a UFO. But it does not mean it's extraterrestrial. You can't assume as an honest, objective investigator that it must be alien if you can't tell what it is. No, it just means you don't know what it is. Until you get an answer, it's unidentified. If you call it an alien spaceship, or if you think it's an alien spaceship, then you've identified it and you need to say it for what it is. But we have no evidence today, anywhere in all the 70, 80 years that they've been researching this phenomenon, that anybody can say it's an alien spaceship. Okay? They can only make an assumption. There is no evidence today that proves extraterrestrials exist at all. But we have evidence that proves that they aren't what they say they are, which we'll get to in the end. So as I progressed into this organization, MUFON, a couple things I was told I needed to do, and that was first set up a couple, opportunities for investigators to join me that I can train up to help follow up on doing sighting reports, and to hold public meetings. And they needed to be free public meetings, open to the public, where the public could come and you could share with them how MUFON works, share with them the work we're doing, and get them interested in joining MUFON also. Because the more people you have looking at this phenomenon, the closer you'll get to finding answers. That's the idea. And so I went to a public library, and the public library said, yep, if you're not charging anybody, we'll let you have the room for free. And I only have to do one meeting a month, so I picked a Sunday afternoon and at the last Sunday of the month, and I said, we're going to have a UFO meeting. And they said, well, we'll give you TV, we'll give you VCR, we'll give you whatever you need to show videos or, do PowerPoint talks or whatever. And no charge. And I said, this is great. It's not costing me anything. I used to bring a coffee pot and set it up, for people to have free coffee or whatever. But when you put up a sign on the door that says free UFO meeting, I got to tell you, Laura, you get all sorts of people show up, especially if they got nothing better to do. On a Sunday afternoon, nothing better to do, they're going to show up. Okay, and they got stories to tell. And this is where things got interesting. Of course, we did have UFO reports coming in that we did follow up on, for sighting reports, which kept us busy. But the meetings were the most interesting part. And as I started into these meetings and listening to these stories, because everybody had a story, and they thought that because we were MUFON researchers and field investigators, and we had answers for them. But we were asking the same questions they were. But they thought we had answers, but we didn't. And the more we listened to them, the more questions we had. But the stories were quite fascinating as we listened. As I got into this, there was one group of people that were the most interesting to listen to. And those were the ones that were coming in and saying that they had contact with beings that they believed were extraterrestrial, or they had been abducted by beings that they thought were extraterrestrial, and they thought that these beings were actually behind the UFOs that we were chasing. And we started listening to their stories, and we learned a lot of things right up front. First, people that were claiming to be abduction experiencers were not happy people. Their lives had been turned upside down by the abduction experience. These experiences of being taken to a craft and medical procedures performed on them and causing lots of pain and fear and trauma, it destroys their lives. And they have no control on when it happens or when it doesn't happen. They're taken against their will. They had no idea on how to make it stop. They didn't know why it was happening to them. And some of them were even having it happen to their children. You know, and how horrible is that, to be a parent and know that not only is it happening to you, but you have no way to stop it from happening to your child. You know, that's a terrible feeling. You know, and we were hearing these stories, you know, and it's like, this is really terrible stuff. But at the same time, as a researcher, I had to look at this and understand that, you know what, these people are on the front line of this phenomenon. And I told my investigators this. I said, guys, if we're going to get to real answers about what this phenomenon is about, I think we need to be focusing on this abduction and contactee experience, because these people are the front line of the experience. When we're investigating UFO sightings, it's long after the fact, yes. Very little evidence at all, yes. But these people had powerful stories of actually dealings with the entities themselves, and could give us an insight of why the entity does this and who the entities could possibly be and what their purpose was. And I said, you know, let's look at our focus and change it to this direction and start listening more to these stories and doing the research mostly on the abduction experience. I think that's where we're going to find answers, if any answers at all. So we did. But something we talked about was how horrible shape these people were in psychologically. And it scared us that we might cause more damage than what's already happened to them if we didn't know how to do this properly. So we started consuming all of the literature, the DVD talks, the conference talks that the top researchers in the world at that time in abductions had done. And we tried to learn as much as we could before we started doing investigations into the abduction phenomenon, so that we wouldn't do more damage to these people, so that we could properly investigate them and hopefully try and figure out a way to help them. So that's where our focus went. And once we felt we were ready, we started doing interviews with these experiencers and documenting their testimonies of their experiences, and like I said, even though there was a common thread through the experience, there was still a lot of differences that we didn't understand. If it was one race of beings behind all of this, why didn't they all look alike? Why didn't the ships look alike? These are those red flags I talked about. Their purposes and their agendas, why weren't they all the same? And these are questions we had in the beginning. Now, something else started happening as we started listening to these people. I started sensing something else was happening here that I didn't understand. Remember, first off, I still don't believe that there's aliens. I still, like they say in America, you got to treat me like I'm from Missouri. You have to show me, the evidence. Until then, I'm still looking for it. I don't have an answer for what this actually is. I didn't believe in aliens from the start, and I still didn't yet, but I'm still looking to find out what's behind this. If it is alien, it's going to show itself. But the one thing I started hearing amongst a lot of the experiencers was this spiritual connection between the experience, the phenomenon, and something that they were involved with. And I didn't understand what that spiritual connection was. I wasn't a spiritual person. But I knew that it had to be looked at. Now, MUFON warned me about this part of this experience and this part of the phenomenon. They said you want to stay clear of that. You can't scientifically investigate it, so we're not focusing there. But as an honest, objective researcher, you can't just say, I'm not going to look at that part of the information. If it's part of the experience, if it's part of the phenomenon, you need to look at the whole thing. You need to bring all of the pieces of the puzzle to the table. If you want to know what that puzzle picture is going to look like, you need to use all the pieces. Okay? If you've ever put them... Go ahead. Very, very good point, because what you said there is attractive, okay? These entities, some of the lies that they tell, they're seductive, and we become attracted to these stories that they're telling us, and that's something that was happening during these experiences. People were telling that even though the abduction experience was horrible, but yet the entities told them it was for a very special purpose, that they were chosen, to share a message for the world, So there was a seductive aspect of it, even though the experience itself was horrific in nature. But that seductive part of it is what kept the people involved, And this spiritual aspect that I was starting to see is part of that connection. These people were made to feel special. They were told that they were our creators, which means we're treating them like gods, that they maybe are the gods that we thought we knew who God was, but these entities saying that they created us, maybe they are the gods, and they always gave the impression, some of them anyway, not the Greys, but like the Nordics, gave the impression of having, a higher spiritual nature to them. They were almost angel-like, and that's seductive to an experiencer to want to be part of that. very much correct. And what we found in our research, and we gave it a title because it reminded of something that we watch on TV, and your listeners are going to be aware, understanding of what I'm talking about when I say it. What we found is the idea of having entities that treat you real bad, that are supposed to be like, the really horrific experience. And then the ones that are more angel-like, that say that they are, they're the ones that are special. They're the ones that are godlike. They're the ones with the special message for us. What we found is it's very much like what you see on a police TV show, where you have good cop and bad cop, but they're both cops. These ones that give the illusion, the appearance of being higher spiritually, are just better at lying. It's part of the game that they play to deceive us. They deceive us with the horrific experience, and then the so-called Saviour entities come along and say they're there to help us, but really they're not. You're just there to suck us deeper into the hook of the experience with their lies. They're better at the lies. And it's a fascinating game they play. And what we have is people that have gone through this horrific experience, but they end up falling for the lies of the good cops or the good aliens, but they're not really good. But they end up falling for them and supporting them and doing everything to help get their message out to the world, that they're our saviors, that they have a special message. They're here to save the planet. But you know what? You know what we're describing there is a phenomenon called the Stockholm Syndrome. And the Stockholm Syndrome came about from what they found after World War II with soldiers that had been prisoners of war. They were highly abused as they were prisoners and as a POW. But when they were freed after the war, everything they spoke about was in support of their captors. In other words, it doesn't matter how much they were tortured, they ended up siding with the enemy. And that's called the Stockholm Syndrome. And that's exactly what we're seeing with people who have been through this abduction experience. If they get to that point where they're deceived by the angelic type, then they're very hard to help because they've sold themselves over to these entities. A good example. Go ahead. Correct. And the more I started learning about all of this so-called pseudo-spirituality that was part of this phenomenon, the more I was sucked into it myself. And like yourself in your past, you said that you were involved in the New Age for some time. Well, that part of the rabbit hole took me right into that with these experiencers, because as the more I tried to learn, the more I was seduced by the experience itself, the New Age experiences, the New Age enlightenment, the New Age ideas and studies. They were seductive to me, and that's how they hook people. You're constantly looking for the next answer, for the next truth, but there never is a final truth or a final answer. That quest for enlightenment is only a carrot on a stick dangling out in front. You never reach it, And I lasted about 4 years involved in that New Age practices, trying to understand it and trying to understand how it was part of this phenomenon. So, stopping right there for go ahead. I didn't get into channeling myself. I was getting into meditation, into out of body experiences. Um, Channeling, I did follow a channeler that I believe she was actually channeling, spiritual entities. To this day, I don't know whether she really did or not. It was pretty convincing, you know. Um, but I got into doing all sorts of, dowsing, all the things that, all of it, looking for truth, and there's so much that's there that's all pseudo truth. It's not real truth, but it keeps you looking everywhere to try to find the next real thing, and it's never there. Exactly, and this quest for special knowledge that the New Age is about, the whole thing, the seduction using knowledge. Where have we heard that story before? That's the story right out of the garden. That's the story that right out of Adam and Eve in Genesis, in the beginning of the Bible. You know, the 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 devil tempted Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil, that they too could be like God. The same exact thing we hear today with the New Age. It's the same exact lie. It's not even been changed. The enemy hasn't even changed it. It's still the same lie. It's about knowledge. You can be like God if you can gain the knowledge. And that's that quest for enlightenment. Sure. No. And I think the key to what keeps us from getting down that rabbit hole is having discernment. And there's only one source to be able to get true discernment, to decipher right from wrong. That can only come from the Holy Spirit itself. And we'll talk about that a little later. But that is something that's real important. Is that discernment is missing, and that's why people never know when to stop. And along those same tracks, and I'll probably make some people mad by saying this, but people that are into conspiracy ideas, that's the same type of seduction as New Age ideas. The whole thing of everything's a conspiracy. It controls your whole life. And I know people that are like that. They can't trust anything or anybody. And it's all about how the world's out to destroy us. And it's like, come on, you know, you still need to have your regular life too. But they just get so sucked into it. Well, back to the storyline. So I've had an opportunity when I first got into this topic to be able to look at this phenomenon through a set of eyes that were non-spiritual, agnostic humanist, and then here I am later looking at this phenomenon through the set of eyes of somebody who's into New Age practices. And then as we progress through the 4 years into the New Age, I'm still doing investigations. I'm still with MUFON, but I had a girlfriend that was working with us that I met, and she was working with us doing, the abduction research with us. And that was important because a lot of your abduction experiencers, primarily your abduction experiencers, seem to be women. Um, I'm not saying there's no men, but primarily women. And a lot of the information that they're sharing about their experience can be very sexual in nature. And it's hard for them to share what's happening to them to a man or a couple men who are investigators sitting there with them. So it was very helpful to have my girlfriend with me to where she could do the questioning and just share with us afterwards so that we could, make it far as part of our, filing the work of the research itself, of the testimony itself. It made things a whole lot easier. Now, my girlfriend was, she claimed to be a Christian, but I knew that she also looked at other things, at the same time. She was respectful of my New Age practices and all the crazy stuff I was looking at, as I was respectful of her claiming to be a Christian and her Christian things that she did. But there was one point and it was November of 1996. There was a couple of cases we were working on, and things were kind of strange. And she saw that we weren't really, my partner and I weren't really catching what was going on. But she pulls me aside and she says, some of these cases can be very dark, I believe, and I think you really need some protection as you continue deeper into this type of research. And I said, oh, I got plenty of protection. And I pulled out my crystals out of my pocket in my little crystal bag, because I was into crystals too. And I said, here, this one, I got plenty of protection. Look at all these, This one protects me from this and this one from that. She goes, no, put those back. I said, I'm talking about real spiritual protection when you're in this field. And I said, what are you talking about? And she says, there's something dark and sinister here that I don't think you understand, and I don't think you realize that you're not protected from it. And I said, well, tell me what you got. And she pulls out a Bible, and I went, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, we talked about keeping all this separate. I said, that Bible's got nothing to do with this UFO abduction phenomenon. She says, oh, I think it does. And I said, no, it doesn't. And I said, move on. Next subject. And she says, wait a minute. She says, you've always told people that you're the most open-minded, objective investigator there is. And I said, okay, you got me. What do you got? So I'm going to give her 5 minutes to explain herself. And she says, well, have a seat. I want to share something with you. And I said, okay. And I sat there, and she opened the Bible, and she shared with me verses from God's holy word. Now I say that. I wouldn't have said that as a New Ager or even before that. But when I heard those words that she read me, I said, you know what? I want that protection. I had just heard the word of God like I'd never heard it before. And I grew up in the church with my parents, My parents were Protestant, they were Baptist, and I heard the gospel many times. I just never did believe it. And here, after all of these years, I'm 42 years old at the time, and this gal's reading me words out of the Bible that were changing my life. And I said, I want that protection. And she says, you can have this protection, and here's how you do it. And that day, that evening, as we were talking, I gave my life to Christ. And that was November of 1996. Things were about to change. Remember, I told you I've already looked at this phenomenon from two different perspectives. One as an atheist, one as a New Ager. And here I am, a UFO investigator, abduction researcher, but now I'm a Christian. Well, first things first, I said, "What's a Christian? You know, what am I? What am I? What makes me a Christian besides I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior? I want to know because I'm a researcher, I'm an investigator, and I like to know things. So teach me what a Christian is." And I knew that it would take too long just learning on Sunday in church. I wouldn't live long enough to know what I wanted to know. And my partner, who was also a Christian at the time, he didn't realize what we were actually involved with. Um, he says, "You know what? I have a friend who has a Bible study course on VHS tape. Each tape is 2 hours long. We can listen to one each night after work, and it's 2 weeks. There's 14 lessons, and it teaches you a whole lot about the Bible, a whole lot about Scripture, a whole lot of what Christianity is about, and you can learn very fast." And I said, "Well, that's pretty good because I got 2 weeks off from work at Christmas time, and we can do this one every evening, and I would love to." So we sat down the 2 weeks. We started playing the tapes each night at this guy's house, my partner's friend's house. And one night come along about halfway through the course, and he puts in the videotape, and the guy starts talking on the tape, and he says, "Tonight we're going to talk about spiritual warfare." And I went, "Wow, that sounds pretty impressive. Spiritual warfare." I had no idea what that was, but it sounded cool, you know. It sounded exciting. And as he went on, he started quoting a scripture from Ephesians in the New Testament, and it was from chapter 6, it was verse 12. And he said, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in the heavenly realm." And in that instant that I heard him say that verse, I saw something in front of my face, like a vision.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
but not unusual.
So we now have 3 minutes left. So what I'll do is I'll call you back, and in that 3 minutes, if you can finish about your vision, and then share your blog and pray for the audience,
Okay.
that would be great. So I'll call you back now, and you finished off by saying you had a vision. That's where you were
Okay.
finished at. So just pick
Okay.
up from there. That'd be
Okay. Well, this vision that I had was of the most horrific thing. Okay, I'm here. You want me to keep going? Okay. This vision that I had was of the alien gray, and then it morphed into the most horrific thing I had ever seen. And I knew right then and there that I was being shown that these entities weren't who they say they were. And that was the first time I'd ever known in my heart or anybody else that this wasn't what it appeared to be. Now, there's a lot more to this story still to come. And I think we're going to have to do another show, Laura, because there's a lot more information to share. So for closing up on this evening, I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to go and read the website, which you can read at www.ce4research.com. And there's testimonies on there. You'll see the research that we've done for the past 20 years. You can also go to the Facebook page and like us there and follow us. CE4 Research. Just put it in on your Facebook, for looking for a page. It'll pop up. Plenty of information there. You'll find my email. You can contact me if you have questions or you want to share a testimony. And I just want to take a second to pray for those that have been listening to this show, and maybe that know others that need to listen to the next show that comes on about the rest of this. And Heavenly Father, we ask that you make sure that these lines stay open, and this opportunity to hear the truth is there for everybody out there in the listening realm. That those that are looking for hope from this horrible experience will know that this truth is real, and this truth is here to set them free. And that truth is through Jesus Christ. And we're going to show that on this next show, and show it, take it step by step, where you understand that these entities are not real, but Jesus Christ is real.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I would emphasize that listeners, please, whether you may feel your aliens are good beings that you're talking to, the noble Canadians, intergalactic federation of light, or whether it's bad aliens that are attacking you, please tune in again next time to hear more of this fascinating research Joseph Jordan has got to share with us. And he is one of the experts in the world on this theme, so please tune in again next time, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Laura. Until the next show, it's going to be a good one.
Until then, God bless you.
God bless.
The preceding program was made possible by kind donations from the listeners to Eternal Radio. for which we are very grateful. It takes a great deal of time and resources to prepare, produce, record, and broadcast our programs to listeners in over 60 countries around the world. Our potential audience is much larger, and Eternal Radio can now be heard all around the world, online, on tablet, on smartphone, and on TV. If you would like to help us continue broadcasting sounds to energize your faith, together with the message of God's love for all mankind around the world, please prayerfully consider making a donation. From your mobile phone, simply text ELCM02, followed by your donation preference of £3, £5, or £10 to 70070. Thank you for listening.